Beneath the greatest amphitheater ever constructed, a woman sits alone in a stone cell. Above her, 50,000 Romans have just witnessed her husband's death in combat with a lion. As the crowd disperses and torches fade to darkness, heavy footsteps approach. A gladiator emerges from the shadows, covered in blood that belongs to others. A guard unlocks the cell door. The gladiator points. What we're about to explore isn't fictional horror. It was ordinary in the Roman Empire. Archaeological and historical evidence reveals a systematic, state-sanctioned reality that unfolded after the spectators left the arena. This isn't speculation or theory. Roman writers themselves documented these events, and physical evidence remains carved into the stone beneath the Colosseum itself. Understanding this will fundamentally change how you view ancient Rome. Popular films and entertainment have misrepresented gladiators for decades. Movies like Spartacus and Gladiator show us combat, bloodshed, and tales of rebellion and honor. They omit what transpired during the hours following the games when the public performance transformed into something far darker. A system emerged so disturbing that contemporary historians developed new Latin terminology to describe it. They call it victoria carnalis, carnally victorious. Interestingly, the Romans never needed this phrase. They didn't consider the practice notable enough to name because it was simply accepted as normal. Roman authors, including Martial, Juvenal, and Seneca, wrote about a world in which captured women from conquered territories were stored beneath arenas and given as rewards to successful gladiators. This wasn't poetic language or metaphor. Women were literally distributed like commodities to fighters who performed well. The Roman government itself managed this infrastructure, using the same systematic approach they applied to constructing aqueducts and building roads. Consider the implications. The civilization that invented concrete and representative democracy also industrialized and perfected systemic sexual violence. To comprehend the underground horrors, we must first understand how Rome transformed human beings into property and resources. This represented methodical dehumanization on an industrial scale, beginning the moment Roman military forces conquered new territories. When Rome defeated a rebellion in Gaul or destroyed a city in Judea, the victory extended beyond the battlefield. An entire population underwent processing. Young men designated for execution in mines or arenas. Young children sold through slave markets across Roman territories. Women classified as war captives, property belonging to the state. The truly disturbing element emerges in Roman legal doctrine. Conquered individuals lost their status as human beings under the law. They were reclassified as res, things, the identical legal classification applied to furniture or animals. A conquered woman possessed fewer rights than a table. Anything could be done to her without legal consequence, because crimes cannot be committed against objects. Yet Rome's dehumanization extended beyond legislation. The spectacles themselves functioned as instruments of psychological domination over both the subjugated peoples and Rome's own population. These events served purposes beyond entertainment. When spectators watched a captured Germanic leader fight a beast, they weren't simply observing death. They witnessed Rome's power demonstrated in visceral form. This is what befalls those who challenge the empire. During midday intermissions, when wealthy spectators departed for meals, the arena descended into darker territory. Condemned prisoners were forced to recreate scenes from mythology, though with genuine fatality rather than performance. Martial, composing during the 1st century, describes these scenes with chilling nonchalance, as though reviewing a dining establishment. He documents a prisoner dressed as Orpheus, the legendary musician whose songs supposedly entranced all creatures. Guards brought him into the arena alongside a lion and released a bear. Martial conveys a sense of disappointment that music failed to work as expected, noting how the bear killed him while 50,000 spectators consumed sugared fruit. In an even more disturbing passage, Martial recounts a woman forced to perform the myth of Pasiphae, who engaged in bestiality with a bull. For this woman, the myth became reality, as she endured animal assault in front of thousands until injuries proved fatal. The Roman state constructed a system where human beings experienced sexual violence by animals during leisurely entertainment. This wasn't the aberration of a solitary, unhinged ruler. It constituted standard practice sustained across decades. Senators brought their children. City walls advertised these events. Merchants sold refreshments. Marshall celebrates the system's efficiency, praising how reality matches and exceeds mythology. These rewards existed within an arena where gladiators inhabited a contradictory position Rome never resolved. They were simultaneously society's dregs and elite figures, legally classified as enslaved with status beneath animals. Yet they achieved celebrity status whose images adorned mosaics, and whose names appeared in graffiti left by admirers. Aristocratic women became obsessed with these fighters. Ancient writings from Pompeii call one the aspiration of girls, and another the joy of women. Historical records document instances of noble women paying guards to enter gladiator quarters for private encounters. The fighter Sergius allegedly had romantic affairs with several married patrician women, creating significant scandals. Their bodily secretions were even commercialized. The perspiration these men produced after fights was collected, combined with oil, and marketed as an aphrodisiac and beauty treatment. Few celebrity cultures demonstrate such extreme devotion, yet Rome simultaneously feared these men tremendously. The rebellion led by Spartacus in 73 BC became permanently embedded in the Roman consciousness. 78 fighters escaped and assembled a force of 70,000 soldiers, nearly destroying Rome itself. For 2 years they defeated legion after legion. When Rome finally prevailed, 6,000 were crucified lining the road between Rome and Capua, creating a forest of crosses spanning 200 kilometers with one body every 40 meters. This trauma remained within Rome's collective memory. Each time a fighter picked up a weapon, each facility operator, each spectator recalled that these individuals had genuinely threatened Rome's existence. How could Rome manage these dangerous, valuable men who possessed legitimate grievances and the martial expertise to pursue them? Rome employed a strategy combining severe punishment with strategic rewards, better nutrition, monetary prizes, and the possibility of eventual freedom after sufficient victories served as incentives. Yet the historical record hints at something additional, something more fundamental: the ability to access conquered women held in captivity. The documentation on this matter is frustratingly incomplete. Roman authors mention it in passing as though explanation would be redundant. By assembling scattered references from various writers and analyzing them alongside information about military incentive systems and slave management, a coherent pattern becomes apparent. After significant battle successes, particularly during major spectacles funded by emperors or powerful senators, triumphant gladiators received what sources ambiguously called privileges of victory. Scholars analyzing between the lines and cross-referencing with broader military practices believe this frequently involved access to female war prisoners confined beneath the arena. The procedure was chillingly systematic and regulated. The victorious fighter, still wearing combat gear and covered in arena dust and blood, would be escorted downward into the vast tunnel system beneath the arena floor. An official or administrator from the facility would guide him. They would traverse passages illuminated by oil lamps, moving past where animals were kept and mechanical lifting devices operated, eventually arriving at a specific holding section. These weren't ordinary prison cells. Excavation evidence from multiple amphitheaters throughout the empire, including Capua, Pompeii, and beneath the Colosseum itself, reveals rooms of distinctive characteristics. Low stone platforms ran along walls. Iron rings were fastened into the stone at various levels, some at ground level, others higher. Heavy doors reinforced with metal locked from outside only. Some chambers display evidence of chains permanently integrated into the stonework. Women confined in these spaces were catalogued as captiva damnati, condemned war captives. They'd already passed through Rome's systematic conquest bureaucracy. Officials maintaining records called commentarii documented their information in ledgers, and ledgers tracked property ownership. Every woman received a registration number and a classification denoting her region of origin: Germanica, Britannica, Parthica. The fighter would be presented with a selection of cells. Some accounts suggest choice was offered. Others imply women were simply assigned like equipment from storage. Regardless, a guard would unlock the appropriate cell, the woman would emerge or the fighter would enter, and the door would lock from the exterior. Historical sources don't explicitly detail what followed, but the architecture communicates the story that text does not. Stone benches positioned at specific heights, multiple iron rings anchored at different elevations, doors locking externally only, scratched walls from fingernails desperate against stone. What renders this particularly sinister involved its legality. This violated no laws. Most Romans viewed it without moral condemnation. This constituted part of the organized game's operational costs. Officials managing Victoria Carnalis held the same rank as those coordinating animal displays and maintaining arena equipment. From the state's viewpoint, this arrangement efficiently solved multiple difficulties. Gladiators received incentives affordably. Conquered women represented no financial burden since they were already classified as military spoils. The system reinforced the fighter's sense of authority and distinction without granting authentic freedom or political power, and it delivered a message simultaneously to both the fighter and the conquered. This is Rome's dominance in practice. Victory in combat grants authority over the conquered identical to the emperor's power. An unnamed Roman author, quoted later by historians, expressed it plainly. The victor claims reward through conquest exactly as the empire claims territories through conquest. Archaeological investigation of these spaces provides stark confirmation. When 19th-century excavators first dug beneath the Colosseum, they focused on impressive engineering achievements like the systems that elevated animals and the elaborate networks allowing personnel and equipment movement. However, as excavation intensified, unexpected discoveries emerged. Specialized rooms serving no obvious functional necessity. Small chambers, typically between 10 and 15 square meters, positioned in a distinct section of the underground space, away from where animals were kept and where fighters prepared. Their specific features disturb modern archaeologists. Stone platforms ran along walls but at heights different from those in other rooms. Multiple iron rings anchored into stone at various elevations, some at base level, others at waist height, still others higher. Doors were constructed from dense wood reinforced with iron bands and locked from outside exclusively. Stone walls in numerous chambers display scratching patterns, fingernails scraping desperately against solid material. A 3rd-century historian named Cassius Dio referenced chambers existing beneath major amphitheaters for those awaiting their purpose. The phrasing deliberately maintains ambiguity, though within its context, discussing games administration and human management. The most disturbing confirmation comes from writings etched into walls. Within the tunnel system of the Capuan Amphitheater, the location where Spartacus initiated his rebellion, excavators discovered etchings on cell walls. Some written in Latin, others in languages from throughout the empire. Most remain incomplete, but some are decipherable. One roughly translates from crude Latin to meaning, "I was Aemilia of the Belgae. My children were killed before me, now I am nothing." Another, apparently in Celtic, translates approximately as to any deity listening, "Let me die before tomorrow." These are voices history typically discards. Formal Roman documentation preserves emperors and commanders, catalogs military accomplishments and engineering feats. It never names captured women categorized as resources. Yet the stones themselves hold memory. The architecture testifies to something essential. This operation was constructed for efficiency and repetition. These weren't improvised locations. They were deliberately constructed, preserved facilities, incorporating specific design intended to enable their function. Examining how Rome handled other arena systems clarifies this pattern. Fighter barracks, animal facilities, armories, every component of the arena infrastructure underwent careful planning and consistent standardization throughout the empire. The holding chambers integrated identically. This represented state infrastructure deliberately constructed for methodical harm. Certain historians question interpreting these spaces so definitively, proposing they may have accommodated various purposes, and that modern perspective may distort ambiguous evidence. Nevertheless, combining architectural analysis with historical references, the character of Roman military culture, and rational consideration of operational requirements, the reality becomes inescapably evident. We must now address history's most painful silence, the actual lived experiences of women trapped within this apparatus. Historical records barely document their individual lives. Personal writings don't exist. Testimony wasn't recorded. What survives are accountings listing them numerically and inventories describing them as animals. Female Germanic, approximately 20 years, maintains good health, assigned to Colosseum containment. The nightmare can be reconstructed through understanding the conquest process. These women weren't casual prisoners. They emerged from particular conditions of complete devastation. When Rome conquered resistant regions, during conflicts like the Dacian Wars or the Britannic suppression led by Boudica, what followed adhered to Roman military standard procedure. Following the concluding engagement, the remaining population underwent systematic processing. Fighters and potential soldiers faced execution or forced labor in terrible conditions. Younger children were separated and transported to eastern slave markets, never to see their lands or relations again. Women of reproductive age were classified as war captives and transported in chains to holding facilities. For such women, reaching the arena represented descent through escalating circles of suffering. Your settlement had burned before your observation. Your children had been seized from your grip as they screamed. You'd been chained alongside numerous other women and marched across enormous distances to Rome. You'd been inspected like livestock, assigned identification, and locked in darkness beneath the monument constructed by those who destroyed everything familiar. The anticipation was itself torment. Each sound was perceptible. The cheering from above as individuals perhaps known to you underwent imaginative execution for crowd amusement. Animal slaughter screams, applause for particularly skilled killing, and certainty of permanent captivity. No exchange system existed. Rome didn't bargain with conquered peoples. Your family or community, presuming survival, would never discover your fate. You'd vanish into empire's machinery. Footsteps came. Your door opened. A determination was made. The door closed and secured. You stood alone with someone who'd spent the day killing for spectacle. Roman law offered nothing. Magistrates couldn't be petitioned because you weren't legally a person. Even suicide, occasionally treated with dignity in Roman philosophy, wasn't available because successfully completing it meant robbing the state of its possessions, and your corpse would simply be employed otherwise. This represented warfare at the level of civilization itself. The mistreatment of conquered women wasn't incidental to Roman military practice. It constituted deliberate strategic design, destroying resistance so thoroughly that descendants wouldn't consider defying Rome formed the objective. Surviving texts make this explicit. Following the Jewish revolt's suppression in 70 AD, the chronicler Josephus documented how Romans deliberately assigned Jewish women among fighter companies and spectacle events, to demonstrate to survivors not merely their political subjugation, but their inability to defend their own family. The meaning was unmistakable. Oppose Rome and your relatives encounter this. Yet occasionally, this framework broke unexpectedly. Despite its industrialized brutality, Rome maintained myths about itself. The empire conceptualized itself as distributing civilization and organization to barbaric populations. This self-conception required specific horrors remain concealed. This brings us to something forcing uncomfortable public acknowledgement. Exceptionally rarely, women themselves participated in arena fighting. Historical sources conflict concerning their origins. Some were certainly imprisoned and compelled to participate, though others appear to have been aristocratic women who, existing in a society that denied them agency, perceived the arena as warped authority and celebrity. The mere presence of female fighters scandalized Roman elites. The satirist Juvenal articulated his disgust regarding patrician women who trained with combat implements, questioning what dignity could be found in female helmet-wearing. In 200 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus attended spectacles in Antioch showcasing female fighters. According to Cassius Dio, who witnessed the event, the response proved unexpected. Greek audiences received them with gravity appropriate for male combatants. Roman audiences, conversely, shouted obscenities, made sexual commentary, and approached the entire exhibition as crude entertainment. The female participants weren't regarded as warriors. They became sexual spectacle accidentally positioned in a venue for lethal combat. Severus experienced profound embarrassment, not concerning the violence, but regarding the Romans' inability to separate cruelty from sexuality when women fought. The spectacle's respectability, functioning as propaganda, suffered from audience reaction. Therefore, Severus prohibited women from fighting. Consider the significance. Protecting women from violence wasn't the concern. Captured women remained confined beneath this identical arena. The violence's visibility posed the problem. It became too public and obvious in ways undermining Rome's self-perception. Abuse itself wasn't problematic for the administration. Concealment mattered. Violence didn't cease following Severus's prohibition. It retreated to the shadows where it had primarily occurred. The spectacles continued for centuries, persisting even after Rome embraced Christianity during the 4th century. Fighting persisted for generations afterward. The final documented combat occurred in 404 AD, when a monk named Telemachus entered the arena to halt a fight and was killed by the furious crowd. Emperor Honorius subsequently issued a permanent ban on combat fighting. Even prohibition didn't conclude captivity. The structures persisted. War captive acquisition remained customary throughout Byzantine governance. The framework gradually disappeared not through moral change, but because the Roman state itself disintegrated. Territorial conquest halted. Captive availability declined. The institution collapsed from resource depletion rather than ethical advancement. Currently, Colosseum visitors photograph themselves near magnificent stonework and appreciate ancient construction. Tour guides describe combat and animal events. The vast majority never learn of the underground chambers. The stones remain. Those rings fastened to walls haven't corroded. Fingernail scratches from desperate individuals remain preserved under accumulated dust. The property inventories recording human beings as numerical items sit in archives and European museums, accessible to interested researchers. This wasn't occasional occurrence. This represented official policy. This was infrastructure. This constituted normality. The Colosseum functions as testimony to actual empire. Beyond monumental design and celebrated conquest lies industrialized devastation required to sustain absolute authority. Every stone represents compensation beyond currency. It was compensation with intentionally obliterated lives through humanity's most organized brutality. The visible combat represented merely the component Rome wanted witnessed. The remainder occurred in those rooms with extinguished light when crowd sound disappeared. Those silenced voices, those not preserved in formal narrative, those chroniclers dismissed as unworthy of documentation, remain within that stone. They're audible for those willing to listen. This constitutes the history that classrooms exclude.